So let's just open with a word of prayer, and then we'll start. Why don't I ask one of you to start for us? Anyone? You know, when we have teens, when we have a teen session, it's very hard to get anyone to open in prayer unless we call out the names. So I'm guessing that parents will be a lot more open to pray. So anyone who wants to be really into and unmute and just pray for all of us, pray for us as we speak what God wants us to speak. So anyone? Thelma, come on.
Yeah. Lord Jesus, we thank you and praise you, Lord, for your grace and your mercy. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for your presence. Thank you, Holy Spirit, that you're here in our midst. Even before we invited, you are so on time, Master, that you have arranged for this meeting. And I thank you and praise you, Lord, for each and every parent who has a burden for their children, to raise up a generation to slay giants, Master. We thank you and praise you, Father, for your anointing which rests on Nancy and Manoj. And I thank you and praise you, Father, for the heart that they have to serve you so diligently. I thank you for the purity of their mind and heart, Master. So dying to hear your word and to deliver it with purity of thought, Master. I thank you and praise you, Father, for the ministry, and especially as we enter this evening, Lord. Lord God, Holy Spirit, prepare us, prepare us to be servants, to be able to diligently raise our children to serve your kingdom, Lord. I thank you and praise you, Father, that every word has been orchestrated and written by you and will enter our hearts to bring forth much fruit. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, Thelma. Okay, so good evening.
എല്ലാരും നിർത്തിക്കേ ഞാൻ ഇവിടെ ഇത് കേൾക്കുവാ
Okay, I'll just, yeah. Um, I know we get this sometimes. Good evening, good evening, good evening. I don't know how many of us have had a good week, bad week, ugly week. I hope we've been rested well and all set to journey together today. Um, Welcome to each one of you. Thank you again for trusting us with this time and this journey. And it's so awesome to see that as parents, we are committed. As Selma prayed, we are committed to seeing our children grow up in the knowledge of God and walk in the ways of God, you know, and not make the mistakes that we made as parents. And so, as always, we want to commend each of you as parents for even, you know, taking this step, for investing this time, and we want to appreciate that because not a lot of parents do this. You know, it is not a very obvious thing to do, unfortunately, especially in Christian circles. Either we don't have the time or we don't have, you know, I don't know, the trust or whatever it may be. So thank you for coming back a second week. And you know, I hope you were able to use some of the things that we discussed. As we always say, I know some of you have asked to keep your videos off because either your connections are not great or you're still going from one place to the other. But it would be great if you could keep your videos on because it's always good to see faces as we speak, you know, and do keep your audios on mute. So I'm just going to ask Manoj to help us do a quick recap from last week. And yeah, all of us are set to share, unmute, and share because that's what will make this more interesting.
Okay. Good evening once again to all of you, and I'm not going to be doing the recap. I'm going to be asking you to do the recap. Okay. So there are 28 of you currently on this forum. So why don't one of you start sharing with what you have kind of taken away from last weekend? And then I'm sure the others will start to share. So who wants to unmute and go first?
You can check your notes. It's okay.
Keeping the end in the mind, that is thinking about our children, not at the as the thing. One moment.
Yeah, I think keeping the end in mind is what Srimati was saying. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
and
ahead.
then talk to children, not just officially, just for the sake of work, but chat with them.
Very good, Sumati. Thank you. And Ramesh. Okay, who's next? Just unmute and go for it. One thing, just one thing you've taken away.
Language of love.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard and Shiva.
Yeah, I think something that stayed with us was Pastor Manoj, you mentioned the prefrontal cortex, right? I think that is something that we will never forget. And that kind of was a light bulb or a eureka moment for us, because that, explains so many things that we see in our teens. So I think that has stayed with us, and that kind of helps us to choose our battles with more thought, I think.
Yeah, in addition to that, I think the talk with kids on non-agenda items, which we seldom do. In the heat of the moment, we always try to ask them about things that are always, did you do your homework? Did you go for your tuitions? Things like that. So I think we learned that we have to do that more often than not going forward. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sarah and Sunil. In fact, Neslin has also written in saying that the prefrontal cortex is something that she's taken away. So that's great. Okay, let's have one more.
Communicating. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Communicating to your child in their language of love rather than your language of love was a takeaway for me, because most of the time we try to communicate in our language of love rather than theirs. So that was my takeaway.
Yes.
Thank you, Rekha. Febu.
It was the same thing, to find out the kids' love language. That was takeaway for me and Lisa, just to find out what we thought was their love language was not their love language. So at least that was not the priority for them. So.
And you have 4, so you need to do that 4 times over.
Yes.
Who else?
Yeah, feel free to share. I mean, there are no right, wrong answers. Just, it's just what you've taken away and you can apply in, your own life. So feel free to share.
And also to give some time, to each other, even to kids and to us. One thing which was, many things were take away, but like one thing which, pops up along with what is already mentioned is God is bigger than our mistake. So knowing now the new way of dealing, give each other, children and parents time. And again, seeing the end from the beginning.
Yeah, Lloyd.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Marina. Lloyd says slow to speak, quick to listen. Yeah, a very big one.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you, Lloyd.
Who else? Including fathers and mothers who are 2 on each screen, we had about 60 plus of you. So we've got about 6, 7 of you who shared. Come on, we can go a few more. We have time for a few more. It just sets the stage, reminds us a little bit of what we spoke about. So
I'd like to thank both of
You
you for
need
the
to understand.
section. Sorry that I could not switch on my video right now. I have a small baby with me. I just want to, one point that struck me was to make the home a fun place, a place where the child is secure and he can be himself or herself. I think that was a really wonderful point. Thank you so much.
yes, very, very important. Yes.
As you spoke about about the prefrontal brain, one thing is you need to understand the transition. That is very important.
Yeah, transition from being a child to an adolescent to a teenager. Yeah, very important. Lauren has written, children grow in a healthy way when they are exposed to positive environment, and it's important that we do things in love, because without love, all things we do are useless. Yes,
Uh,
true, true. Thanks, Lauren, for sharing. Anyone else? Come on, we're waiting. We're very good at waiting.
Okay, have any of you been able to apply any of these things already in the last week? That'll be very interesting to know.
Yeah, the 17-second timer.
Thank you.
So literally, that thing was sticking in my head, and my daughter has this habit of rattling off whatever her day's experience was after school, especially now that the schools have started. And I'm like thinking in my head, okay, I need to pay attention, and the timer is going on tick, 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 tick. Oh my God, I just couldn't get that off my head, and I had to be so very patient. And she keeps checking with me, Mama, are you listening to me? So seriously, oh my.
Thanks, Thelma.
Good one, yeah.
Trying to be more understanding towards them, knowing all the facts that we discussed last time. But still, there were times because of busy schedule we could not do as what we started with. But I'm sure going forward we'll be able to do it.
Sorry, Sumati. Joel, I think your audio keeps getting unmuted, so if you could just be careful with that, unless you're sharing something. Okay, Anne has shared the part about love languages was good, but the problem lies when we don't have the same love language, and then it becomes very awkward to implement. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where God comes in, right? God's created us as well as your children. So, He has the best love language. He's the only one who has all the love languages all put in one, right? So you can ask Him for strength and for His Holy Spirit to help you, with whatever it is, not just in the matter of love, but in the matter of everything, right? Anything that you would like to apply. Okay, so let's have one more person and then we can move on. One more. Reba, was I seeing you get to the unmute button a few times? No?
Lindsay, I was just, like halfway in the last session and he was not there. And I lost the notes that I wrote also. I don't remember much except for the one that, you should look at your child when you're speaking. And you know how Annette is very sensitive. So
yes,
there are few times when I don't look, and then he has the same character as well. When you don't look at them, they feel as if you're not talking to them, you're not listening. So that is one thing that after that I've thought I should have done, and I should probably apply, look at them. And my mind is like in 1,000 directions at a time. So, that's something I have to learn. Thanks for that.
Yeah, giving them attention. I think that is so important. Lisa mentions rules plus relationship gives a positive environment. Yes, absolutely. Not to be in a hurry to give rules to our children without investing in a relationship with them, friendship with them, conversations, communication with them is very important. Okay, so we'll move on, but I just wanted to add a little bit of a laugh that we had last week. So we have two couples that help us with all the logistics and registrations and sending you. I won't tell you which couple which home this happened in. So the wife tells me, you know what? After the whole session, you know what happened? My husband comes to me and says, "Oh, now I figured." And then she thought there was some big thing that was going to come out of his mouth. He said, "आपका prefrontal cortex तो अभी तक नहीं develop हुआ ना." So they of course had a good laugh, and we had a good laugh too. But on that note, I will hand it over to Manoj to start today's session.
Yeah, and I hope each of you is having a good time. I mean, we learn, but also we have fun along the way, and that's important. Otherwise, it gets really very serious for all of us. Life as it is having its challenges, and we want you all to enjoy. At the same time, be open to what the Lord wants to do. Today, we're going to be looking at two more parts. One is on setting boundaries, very very important, and the other one is about how do we develop emotional health, and under that we'll be covering a little bit on resolving conflict, anger management, which is quite common these days. So those are the two topics that we'll be touching on today. But before I start today, I just wanted to point you back to something that we started week 1 with, and that is the wheel, at the center of which is love. If you remember the wheel, at the center of that, the hub is love. And on the rim of that is modeling values. So everything that you and I learn, if it is not modeled for our children, um, chances are they may not actually pick it up. And it's important that we learn to model these things with love, with care, with patience, which also goes to say that you and I don't have the strength to do that. So that's where we need God's help, right? So ultimately, it's He and He alone who gives us the strength and the ability, the grace, to be able to, raise our children in a way that they understand and know, and they can face life a lot more confidently than they would have otherwise. So just keep that wheel in your mind, and at the hub, the center of that is love. So today we're talking about setting boundaries, and um, setting boundaries. If you look at, see, everything that is being shared, if you pay careful attention, it's all based on the nature of God. This is not just theory, it's all based on who the God of the Bible is. Now, the God of the Bible is a God of love, like we all know, right? But the God of love also operates by boundaries, right? So, in the very first chapter of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, boundaries are very, very prominent in the work of creation, right? So, in the first day itself, he separates the day from the night, and clearly there is a boundary drawn between the two. So, one does not, intrude into the other. Can you ever imagine if day intruded into the night or vice versa? No, but we have very clear separation between day and night. We have very clear separation between heaven and earth. So you can't imagine a world where it's all mixed up, because God is a God of order. And so, having said that, the God of the Bible is a God who is not just a God of love, remember the hub, but he's also a God who operates by boundaries. So, if you have questions in terms of, am I too strict, or am I too lenient, or I don't know how to actually set boundaries, because my parents brought me up, they were very free with me, so I just did whatever I pleased. It does not matter what your background is, it does not matter what your upbringing is. What matters is being open to what God wants to do in your life and mine. And that is something that I want to encourage each of us. So, at this point, wherever you are as a parent, please do not feel stifled if you have not learned some of these truths a little earlier. Because it's so easy to go back and say, I wish somebody told me this a little earlier. Okay, so keep these thoughts in mind that, today, this moment is what matters for each of us, because God's grace is only given for this particular day, right? We cannot live out of tomorrow's grace. All we have is today's grace. So let's rely on God for that. And talking about boundaries, so God is a God of love, God is a God who sets boundaries in place. So he put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he said, you can eat of all the trees, but one tree you shall not eat, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And he placed boundaries with his creation. And we all know what happens when we violate God given boundaries. Okay? So we're not going to go into the story of Adam and Eve, but with that, what I wanted to convey is, as parents, God has placed you and me in the lives of our children, not just to love them, but to also initiate godly boundaries in their lives. It's very important. Now, there are, I mean, when we do studies and when we do research, by and large, there are 4 styles of parenting. And as I begin to explain, you may start seeing your parenting style in one of these. We call it like a 4 quadrant. It's like 4 boxes, right? So the first, why this is important, because depending on your parenting style, you will begin to set boundaries. And those are the areas where you should expect God to bring change. Okay? Um, so when we talk about the 4 quadrants of parenting, the first one is, I would say, the most ideal. It's relational. Like we've been talking a lot about relationships, right? Rules plus relationships creates a positive environment. So as a parent, as parents, when you have a very relational approach towards raising your children, what happens is you are not just warm and loving, but you're also firm with your boundaries. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That is where you and I should be. We should be consistent, not just in our warmth, in our love, in our caring, but also be firm with the boundaries that we put in place for our children. So that's a more relational approach. The other one, the other quadrant, the second quadrant, if you can call it, is where the parents exercise strong control, but very, very little love and support. And I think as Indians, a lot of parents struggle with this. We are a people of list, do and don't, and it's very clear. But when you talk about empathy, when you talk about emotional connect, we meet a lot of teenagers who feel unloved. Now, this second quadrant is more an autocratic style of parenting. You either follow my rules or you get punished. So, what happens is the child grows up in a lot of fear. They will respect you, they will obey you because they are still young, they don't have much options. But the first opportunity they get, they will either rebel or they will leave the home. Okay, so the second quadrant is a more autocratic form of parenting where there are strong control, a lot of rules, rule based environment, but very little emotional support. The third quadrant is permissive or very indulgent parenting. We hear many times, parents come to us and say, "See, when I grew up, my parents just gave me a free access. I just did whatever I wanted." It may sound good to somebody who is listening to them, but as a parent, when you are permissive, when you're indulgent, when you give in to all the desires of your children, that's indulgent parenting. Now, what happens with indulgent parenting? There's a strong inclination to support your child, which means a lot of love, a lot of warmth. But what happens is there is little or no control, which means little or no rules in the home environment. And what happens is when that teen or when that child grows up, because they've grown up in an environment where their parents have been very indulgent, the teen grows up into a young adult not knowing that somebody can say no to them. So when they get into a marriageable age and they hear the first no from their would-be spouse, it's very hard for them because they've not experienced that in their own home, because their parents have just said, "Hey, I didn't have all this in my life. I had a very hard life. Let me give the best to my child." Seems a very, very justifiable conversation to have, but the amount of damage that it does to the child will only be known in the later years, because that child, when that child becomes a teenager, is unable to say no, is unable to receive no. And so what happens is there's a huge sense of entitlement that gets built up in the heart of that child. So just imagine that child goes into the workplace, he or she will start believing that they deserve certain things at the workplace, and that creates its own share of problems. Entitlement is a huge issue, in Christian circles, especially in the church, because of the way many of us have been raised. So that's a permissive, very indulgent form of parenting. And the fourth quadrant is indifferent parenting or neglectful parenting, which means These are the proxy parents. They're only there for namesake, absentee. You can call it another word, absentee parents. You're only there in flesh, but you're not emotionally connected. They may support with finances to a certain extent. Nowadays, even that is going out of fashion because they're saying that we will not support you anymore. So, this is more negligent or what you can say indifferent parent, and the damage that that does is there's little or no control and little or no support, which means no warmth and no rule based environment. So these are the four quadrants. Now, as I've been sharing, you'll begin to quickly see what style of parenting you actually are in today. So I'll just repeat that just for the sake of us to grasp it. The first one is the most ideal one, which is a very relational approach, where you have a good balance of warmth and love, but also firmness when you're setting rules for your child. The second one is autocratic, which means very strong control, very strong rule based environment, but very little support. So, what happens is a lot of fear in the environment. The third quadrant is permissive, very indulgent, giving into everything that the child wants. And there we see is that a lot of warmth, a lot of love, a lot of support, but very, very little control or rule based environment. And the last one is very indifferent, neglected, absentee parents. And the damage there is no control, no love, no support, no emotional connect. The person is just around the home. So that is hard. And we do know of families that are going through that. Possibly single parents are falling into that category. This is a very hard season of life. And our goal, our desire is to help parents through that season. I mean, there is no formula for this. Ultimately, we rely on God and His grace, His mercy to take us through those tough moments in life. But the reason we're sharing this with you all is just so that we are clear about what we are up against. And like I said, our hope and our desire is that with God's help, each of us would come into that place of relational parenting, because that's the way God parents each of us. And that's why I want to point you back to the nature of God. Everything that we share is based on the nature of God. God is very relational. When you're hurting, He doesn't come and, accuse you of something. He waits. He waits for you because He grieves with you. He understands your tears. He understands your emotions. And He weeps with you, like Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, right? So that's a very, very important insight that we have into the heart of God. That when you and I are distressed in our parenting, in our personal lives, God is distressed along with you. And that should be a source of comfort for us. But for those of us who may be doing fairly well, it's still good to know that, hey, how do I become consistent in my relationships, with my children? And that's a relational approach. So that's a little bit on four quadrants of parenting. And according to that style, you and I will begin to set certain boundaries. Now, like we all know, once they become teenagers, and like we discussed last week, there are a lot of changes that happen in the child, hormonal and otherwise. And so what happens is many of the rules that you and I lay down are broken even before it's out of your lips, because they are thinking on their feet, right? So don't be, dismayed with that, because that's just how they're growing, because they're still developing, right? And that's why we need to be a little patient with them, need to be loving. Love languages are beautiful as we try and reach out to them, establish connect with them. But please do not push them to a corner and say you are just, use all those expletives, that can totally damage them. So we are called to be, a lot more understanding of them. So we can't control them. Now, here are some common feelings that teens are going through. These are some common ones just for us to connect. Nobody likes me. They may not tell you, but this is what is playing on their mind. I feel ugly. Now, to you and me, they're the most beautiful things on earth. But the teen is going through a lot of emotions and they're not able to articulate it. And this is quite common. I feel ugly, not good enough. Nobody understands or cares about me. It's a big one. Any place would be better than home. No parent wants to hear that. But this is what is happening in a teen's mind. I just wish everyone would leave me alone. How many times have you seen your teen go in and shut the door and not come out for several hours? I'm sure some of us have experienced that. Because they're going through something that they're not able to articulate. I just wish everyone would leave me alone. Or you have guests at home and they say, Mama, Dada, I don't feel like meeting them. I just want to be in my room. Sometimes they switch off all the lights, they want to be in the dark. To you and me, it may sound strange. It's like, put on the lights. No, I like the dark. So they're going through their own share of emotion. So it's good for us as parents to understand, like we spoke last time, they are in a season of transition. Okay, and our job is to help them on that journey. Okay, another common emotion, everyone is looking at me. So that explains self-consciousness. Suddenly they become so conscious because they believe the entire world is looking at them and no one else. So for example, they don't want to be seen with their parents. How many of you have experienced that? Mama, Dada, please don't come to my college. Very embarrassing. Well, if you've not experienced it, maybe you will sometime. But everyone is looking at me. I don't like to be seen with my parents because, you guys are just so old-fashioned. You're so outdated. Because your clothes, and look at my clothes, I don't want to be seen with you. These are the kind of things that go on in their minds and their hearts. Or I feel like crying all the time. These are common emotions, and the reason these are important is when we are setting boundaries, please take into consideration these as well as some other emotions that you may have actually identified in the life of your child. And all of this is possible only if you maintain that relational approach with your child. Rules plus relationship creates a positive response both ways. So this is how we begin to make our way into their world. Okay? And that's very important. How do we set boundaries? We can give you some, thoughts in terms of what works. There's something called natural consequences. Okay? Now in the Garden of Eden, God set the boundary and he said if you disobey, here's what's going to happen. The day you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you shall surely die. Okay? Now that's talking about spiritual death. Now, that is rules and boundaries which have been clearly communicated to Adam and Eve in this situation. And when God speaks once, he means it. He says, if you break this, here's what's going to happen. That is logical consequence. Okay? And so what happens is, applying that in the life of your child. Many times they may involve in something that you and I know is dangerous. You've explained it to them once, twice, 3 times. They don't seem to be paying any attention to it. Sometimes a good way to set boundaries is to allow them to make their mistakes, and in that process they begin to learn. That is natural consequence. It is hard, it's not easy. You don't want to see your child getting hurt. So say for example, they're going near the fire. Now the natural consequences, you're going to get burnt. Right? And I'm sure many parents, we've all experienced that. Don't go near the fire, stay away. Sometimes when they don't learn, you allow them to put their hand in the fire because you know how close they can get. The moment they get burnt or singed, that memory will stay with them forever. Then they know the fire burns. So that is how we sometimes set boundaries for our children. They're called logical consequences. Very effective way of setting boundaries. The other one is called natural consequences. Natural consequences is, for example, we know the story of the prodigal son. Okay? You remember the father? When the younger son came and asked him for his share of estate, he didn't stop him. He allowed him to go. That son went and experienced the world for himself. And he came to a realization that my father's home is where I should be. Those are natural consequences of one's own choices. Okay? So sometimes we can use logical consequences, sometimes we can use natural consequences. These are just terms, just so that we get a grasp on how we can begin to set boundaries. If your child is misbehaving, make the payment for misbehavior small, because I know some parents can get quite severe with their punishments. That can break the child. Be clear with what you want and what you expect of your child, but let the payment for any or punishment for misbehavior be minor. Do it with love. Don't break the children, because once you break them, then you're dealing with other issues, right? And so these are some helpful things as we set boundaries. Remember that you and the child are on the same side. You're not on two different sides. Very, very important to remember. Sometimes they may seem like our enemies, sworn enemies. I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk to you, and so on and so forth. But please remind yourself that you have a very, very important role to play in their lives. You and your child are on the same side. And don't let anyone get in between. Just God. Okay? Move. This is something very helpful. When you pray and when you seek God, ask God to help you to move from setting external boundaries to enabling your child to inculcate internal boundary setting, which means there's only that much you and I can control with setting boundaries externally. The ideal situation is where the child begins to realize, either through natural consequences or logical consequences, the child begins to realize and takes corrective action well in advance. So, see yourself as a parent moving from externally set boundaries to helping your child set internal boundaries. The Holy Spirit that God has given us enables us to set boundaries internally. These are not man made, imposed boundaries. This is the way God relates to his children. A third important and helpful thing, when you build an environment of trust, we touched upon this last week. A positive home environment, an environment of trust, builds trustworthiness. That's a very important characteristic trait that you want in your children. Trust builds trustworthiness. Give them increasing space. Not easy again if we try it in our own strength. But when we talk about increasing space, we know of parents, from the time they raise their children to the time they get married and have their own children, they treat them the same way. They expect the son and the daughter to pick up the phone and call them and give them a daily report about what's happening. That is not helpful. So when we talk about increasing space, when we raise children, start with laying boundaries. If you need to be strict, start with strictness, but then slowly taper that as the child begins to take responsibility. So as a parent, if you and I are not taking responsibility for our actions and our words, then don't expect that of your children. So start strict and then slowly taper that as you begin to see your children start taking ownership and responsibility. Allow them to make mistakes. It's okay. That's how we encourage them to start taking responsibility. Our own children, we allow them free access into the kitchen. From a young age, we've been both of us in our own ways have been helping them on that journey because they love cooking to a point today where they've messed up the kitchen so many times. They've wasted so much of flour and oil and all of that. But today they're at a place where they can put a meal on the table without the two of us ever entering the kitchen. Now, the point we're trying to make is we would not be in a place like this if we didn't give them the space to make their mistakes. So start with strictness, but then slowly taper that as your children start to take responsibility for their lives. And the last one, please allow them as much as you can to make their own decisions. Because when they make their own decisions, they begin to realize that every decision has a consequence. It's very important. Please do not jump in and make every decision for them. Be available for them. Be a good listener, like we discussed the last time. Listen for emotions and feelings. And when your child comes to you and says, Mama, Dada, what do you think I should do? Then offer them support. But please don't say, hey, this is what I think you should do. And if you don't do it, this is what is going to happen. I'm going to be very unhappy. That's heaping pressure on them because they're growing up in a very different world. And I'm sure by now we've all realized their world is very different. I mean, you and I didn't have mobile phones, we had no internet. These children are growing up in a world that's so different to us. So allow them to make their decisions. Let them make their mistakes. You be on hand to guide them, support them, and encourage them. I'm going to hand that now to Lindsay, but before that, there's a short exercise that we can do. It'll probably take 10 minutes. You should already have that exercise with you. It's a very simple one.
It's on the group, but Tijin is just going to put it on the chat box, the questions.
And it talks about, how to exercise authority based on what we were just sharing right now. Are there any reasons that make you reluctant to set boundaries with your teenager? And then there are some very simple reasons. But as you begin to identify that, maybe it will help you to identify what your challenge is. And the second question is, are there any reasons that you are reluctant to give your teenager increasing freedom? Okay, that's very important. And keep in mind those 4 quadrants that we explained. What kind of a parent am I? What kind of parents are we? That will help you to move more into that relational style of parenting, which is the way God parents each of us. So we'll take 10 minutes and then we'll come back.
Okay, we have another minute to go. Some of you are writing in, so it gives us some idea of what you're thinking, what is going on in your notes, and we will sort of address it. Okay, so I think most of us are done. So we'll move on, and if you still have things to ponder, we'd encourage you to go back and spend time on it. It's very helpful. Might be very simple questions, simple thoughts, but it's very, very helpful to introspect on how we're doing as parents, and what we can do. Even small changes in the way we speak, in the things we do, can make huge, a huge impact on the way children see it or the teenagers see it. Yeah, I think some of the things that some of you were writing back even now while you were doing the exercise, in terms of having boundaries. If you have more than one child, how do we deal with different children, because sometimes their characters are very different, right? Some are very quick to listen, or maybe not that quick, but quicker than the other one. So you tend to have different boundaries, so to speak. But sometimes the way the children see it, is as unfair, and that is again, not okay. So in fact, Manoj and I were just having a little discussion about the prodigal son and the father. The fact that the father's response to both the children were the same. It was love, whether it was when the prodigal son came back home, and the elder brother reacted the way he reacted. The father's response was the same. It was in love. And most of the times, I think as parents, that's always our endeavor. Whether it comes out that way or not is another discussion. But deep inside, whatever we do it because we love our children, right? But sometimes, if we are not able to explain, or if we don't take the time to explain, this problem happens between the children. They see that we either do be showing favoritism to the other person, or there are comparisons between them, and that is something we need to be very mindful of. Don't ignore it. One of the ways in which we would say, from a practical point of view, is whatever boundaries we place in the home. Of course, we try our best to have the same boundaries for all children, and even for us. It shouldn't be that of course, as adults and children, there might be some things that we can do and some things that they can't do. But apart from that, if it is something that we can model as well, we should model that. But our endeavor is to have the same boundaries for both children, or 3 or 4 children that you have. But if for whatever reason there are differences in the way they perceive the boundaries, we need to take time to explain to them why. And the next segment is to do with that, encouraging responsibility. So in the setting the boundaries module, the next thing is encouraging responsibilities. The same way, even between children, some children do a lot more in the house than the others, right? It's just their personalities. It's not that they don't want to do it sometimes. Even in our home, we have 2 children. One of them ends up doing, or can do, 5 things quicker, in a shorter period of time, and fairly well, as compared to the other child, right? And this has nothing to do with the age as such. Of course, when they're smaller, they can't do as much as when they're older. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about fairly the similar kinds of things that they can do, one child can do 4-5 things and do it fairly well in shorter period of time. The other child can do one thing but takes a longer period of time, right? And these are the things that we need to identify. How are they created? They may not be very good at making chapatis, but they may be good at doing something else. So that is for us to call out. That is for us to understand how God has created them, right? And to enable that, not again compare and say, see, your sister is doing so much and you don't do as much. So those are things, and this is something they even face in their own classrooms, right? Their teachers, this is just a natural thing for teachers to say, or bring about in a classroom, and children are constantly being compared. If nobody else is comparing, they're comparing themselves, right? So I think that is very, very important for us to explain, explain why we do what we do. I think especially in today's generation, I think when we were children, maybe we were the last generation. I'm not sure about all you parents. You may be younger than we are, but when we were children, a lot of the things we were not even allowed to say chew. If the father of the house said something, it had to be done. There's no discussion. Sort of obeyed that and said, okay, there's no choice, we better not even open our mouths. But beyond our generation, I think everyone is questioning the questions, right? You want an answer, you ask a question, they give you two questions back. Then finally, at the end of the discussion, like, okay, wait, who asked the question? What was the topic of discussion? And that has to do with just the way the children are exposed now. They're a lot more mature because of the things that they're exposed to a lot earlier, and therefore they need explanations. We cannot say, just do it. I've said my word is the final, so just do it. It just does not work with our children, right? And both of us feel that it's very important that we have those discussions with them. This next segment is to do with encouraging responsibility, right? And in this encouraging responsibility, remember, like what Manoj mentioned earlier, we're going from external boundaries to internal boundaries, right? So when they're children, when they're little children, you have to keep boundaries very clear. So it's like parental control to self-control, right? We all know self-control is a fruit of the Spirit, right? And the Holy Spirit lives in each one of us, and so is is the Holy Spirit in your children. So you have to trust that they can operate in that self-control. But as parents, if you're going to constantly control their every decision, even the clothes they wear, or the way they should put their hair, or for boys also, they hate it, they want to grow their hair, but the moms don't like long hair, so they have to cut their hair, whatever it is. I'm giving very lighter examples, but there are many examples even to do with a number of hours on the screen, or when should you sleep in the night, or when should you wake up in the night, all these kind of boundaries, right? These are things that you have to come from external boundaries to internal boundaries, parental control to self-control. So you have to encourage responsibility, right? We've had some amazing conflicts in homes, and it starts with my 15-year-old will not take the plate from the dining table to the wash area. I'm not even expecting her to wash the plate. All I said is take the plate from the dining table and put it in the wash basin. That's how the fight started, and it went on to something else, so much so that they had to come for help. Right? And I'm sure we are familiar with these things. It starts with a packet of chips. It starts with the water that was finished, and ice cubes. It's fresh in our home right now. You take the ice cubes, you don't fill up the tray. So it's all these smaller things, but start with giving them responsibility. Discuss, talk to them, right? In our home from a very young age, and I think this is something I can attribute to my own parents, especially my mom. I was in the boarding many years, but the little that I had time with my mom at home, she was a working mom, and we were 3 girls, like I mentioned last week. We all had to pitch in, so I was the youngest, so all I did in the chapati making was this, make the balls of atta thing, and, and one of them had to, make the dough, one of them I had to do this, and one of them had to do this, and, mom would make the chapatis. But the point is, in that, we all had a part to play. We grew up with that. Nobody taught us and told us, gave us classes on that. But it was never, I never grew up thinking, okay, Amma is there, she'll do everything. Or my sister is there, or my father is there. It was not even a thought, and when I think back, now that I'm a parent, how did that happen? Because the culture in the home was, it's our home, we all need to pitch in. And I think from a young age, if you can encourage responsibilities, maybe fill up the bottles, fill up the bottles of water or whatever it is. The problem is we don't do that as parents. We don't give it a thought. But all this has to do a lot with their characters being built up. Right? Sometimes you meet 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds, they are oblivious to what happens in a home or how a home has to be run. I remember when I started working in Delhi when I was 20 years old. We were, I think, 4 of us that had to share a house, and I was doing my management training. And the other 3 had major issues with washing their dishes, washing their clothes. I mean, they couldn't, their major points of depression in the evenings was the fact that they had to do this. And for me, I mean, and now I recognize it better, but at that time I didn't know what was going on. I was like, why are we even having this discussion? But today, when I, being a parent, and when I do these sessions, I realize that what we do in the home, to them, or how we raise them up, how we enable them to be part of the home, encourage responsibilities in the home, it is very important. Like Manoj said, when they become 20, when they become 30, these are all issues that really break them down in their character. And that's why even opening a door for someone, again, I think we were the last generation that did that, probably. So today, if there is a teenager that does that for an older person, I always tell the parents, you know what, that's amazing. For all the complaints that you just told me about him, I want to just tell you that kids don't do that nowadays. 16-year-olds don't do that. They don't pick up a bag for an older person. So can we acknowledge that? Can we commend that? Can we remember that there's something good that's happening in there, and not just, talk about all the things that are not happening? So encourage responsibility. Don't nag. So how many of us are nags to our children? At least let's say, how many of us can say that our children think we are nags? Come on, let me see a show of hands. Okay. Yeah, so I'm putting my hands first. Okay, it's mostly the mothers. The fathers can confidently keep their hands down. Yeah, it's mostly us mothers, right? We talk a lot, and we just don't stop. And for them, they think we're nags. So it's not okay. And I'm telling this to myself before I can tell it to any of you. It's not okay. We don't want our children to even think that we are nags, right? And so it's very important that we don't nag them. We don't keep on, keep at it a million times. It is not wrong to repeat yourself. But sometimes we repeat ourselves, like in 30 seconds, we say it 6 times. And we say, how many times do I tell you? So I think that is nagging. So it's not wrong to repeat yourself. We have to repeat ourselves, right? And when they don't do something, don't be at it. For instance, even recently we had this conversation in our own home where, if Manoj or I tell the girls to do something, they don't do it. So our major line is, delayed obedience is disobedience. Right? Have you heard that? Delayed obedience is disobedience. What a line. Wow. But recently we had this conversation with them, and they said, we have exams, and sometimes I just want to finish that chapter in geography and I will go and do it. But then when you keep saying that, it's very irritating and annoying, and then that goes into something else, right? And that's true. It applies to us as well, as to how and when we should be asking them to do something. We should be sensitive to them as they grow up. This is very big. They are big people, little big people, right? So we need to learn to respect their time and see what they are doing as well, and not throw these big lines, delayed obedience is disobedience lines on them, especially in these kind of circumstances, right? So it's very important. So no nagging. make as few rules as possible. And we've said this many times last week and this week, coming back to, what one of you had posted in the exercise time in terms of limits or control or boundaries, even if it's different for different children. Please negotiate those boundaries. When I say negotiate, discuss with them. Don't say, I'm putting this because I'm putting this. No going there. If it's a 3-year-old, yes, I understand you can't explain certain things all the time, especially with regards to, say, sexual abuse and things like that. But there is an age when you have to explain to your children why you tell them what you tell them, and they can understand. God will give you the wisdom to explain it in a manner that they understand. But please don't give them boundaries just like that and say, just do it, because they hate it. And we all know that they hate it, vehemently hate it. Even if you explain to them, they may or may not agree, but that is just us honoring them, just respecting them and saying, you know what, I'm explaining to you why you may or may not understand what I'm saying. Some of them, even when you're explaining, they just make a face and walk off, or they say, that was when you were growing up, it's not for me. That's fine, but all I'm saying is, what we have to do, we have to do. We can't do half of it and then say, I'm the parent, right? So that's what I mean. So explain to them, the boundaries that you put. Negotiate boundaries. We cannot make boundaries non-negotiable, because they're different for different situations and different ages, right? Again, you may have decided, if you have 3 children, when the eldest one reached 13 or 14 or whatever, there was this discussion of phone. What is the age to give your child a phone? Many parents ask, what is the age? I don't know. I have, our daughter, the second one, she's in 5th standard. Almost everyone in her class have their own phones. So I don't even have anything to say, anything to tell her, right? But we still have to explain to her, it is not the age for you to have a phone. You're free to use our phone if you want to chat with your friends, because now, they're not even in school and there's a lot of online. That's fine, right? But negotiate those boundaries. And COVID situation has brought this whole online thing, which we were like, only 1 hour 30 minutes, now everything is online, studies online. So what do? So you obviously have to negotiate, because they throw that back at you and say, you said 30 minutes, so now what am I doing 4 hours on the screen, right? So negotiate, have that discussion. Don't be like the finger of God writing the 10 commandments. Some of us make rules like that. I said it, I can't move, I can't change, I can't change my word. And I think that's something we need to soften. I'm not saying keep changing your boundaries, that is wrong. That's another thing parents really struggle with, because you keep a boundary and then you keep changing, then the father keeps one boundary, then the mother keeps another boundary, and that's very confusing for the child. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying negotiate those boundaries. A year later, if we need to talk about it, if they say, you know what, my friends are really, having this or having that, can I also have it? Again, talk about it. Maybe your answer is going to be no at the end of it, but their understanding has changed from last year, so you may have to repeat that discussion, right? And like Manoj said, the consequences of things is very important, right? And let me give you examples. Like, for instance, boys and girls. What is the right age to have friends that are boys, if you're a girl, if you have a daughter? And what is the right age to have girls as friends if you're a boy, right? These are again things that you need to discuss with your children. Be open when they bring names of friends. As fathers, if you have daughters, the first time this daughter talks about a friend that is a boy and that name keeps coming again and again and again, you're like, okay, now what am I supposed to do? Where is the book? Those kind of things happen. But what I'm trying to say is, you need to discuss with them why you say boundaries are important. For instance, physical boundaries with the opposite sex, or chatting with friends. Chatting is very normal for children now. If they're in 10th or 12th, most of them have phones now. They're chatting with their friends, and it happens to be boys. Now those are discussions you have to have. Now you have something called smileys. You have all sorts of smileys now. You know, I'm a big one on smileys. If you know me, you will get messages. You always get a smiley at the end of it. I love using smileys. But then for children, you know, there are kisses going out all the time, even to boys, and you know, and I'm like, okay, now what is what is this? So have that discussion. Don't leave it. I'm not saying be paranoid parents, but I'm just saying know what's going on in your child's life, negotiate, discuss, allow them to open up to you, and you know, have all these things laid out. You know, a lot of the times we just make rules, we just change rules without explaining to them, and they get very confused, right? So I think that's something that we wanted to talk about in terms of boundaries, in terms of consequences, in terms of negotiating boundaries, in terms of boundaries for different children. Yes, according to their capabilities there might be a little bit of a difference, but if they see it as different, it's very important for us to assure them that the reason why you are doing what you are doing, right? For instance, like I said, two children, the older one ends up doing a lot of things, the second one gets away with it, or the last one totally gets away with it. Now those are things as parents maybe we need to also change. We need to also allow the younger ones to do a little more and not put so much burden on the older one, even if they're used to doing a lot of things in the house. So those are things we need to prayerfully consider and reconsider. Right now, we have a little video, in fact, before we go into the next segment, which is developing emotional health. So we got a family to do this video for us. We've been walking with this family for about 5-6 years now, and the teen comes to our Must Teens, which is, you know, a weekly teen fellowship that we have at Muster. And you know, and so when this family started coming to us, in the sense when the teens started coming to the teens, and we used to hear stories, we used to have you know, amazing funny stories. I mean, now it's funny. At that time it was intense volcanic eruptions. Every Friday when she would come, she's like, you know, like high speed, she'll be talking to me. And then finally, when I get to the point, I'm like, so what actually happened? You know, Amma actually finished the 10 rupee chips. I told her I'll come back from tuition and I'll have it. When I came back, it wasn't there, and I saw the finished chip packet in the dustbin, and the whole volcano started based on that. Can you imagine? So this is that family, but we've had some amazing laughs. And just so that each of you can be encouraged that this too shall pass, and this teenager is 18 now. She's looking for college admissions. She serves in church. She in fact comes to our church. She serves in church. She's very responsible, very very, very compassionate, you know, and so if any of you are at that crazy place with your 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, you know, just remember that it's sure that they will get to 18, they will get to 20, and God will take care of the rest. So I'm just going to ask Tijin to share this video where they're just sharing their journey and different things that they have done.
A few years back, we started noticing changes in our daughter's behavior. She was usually very loving, cheerful, you know, a joy to be around always, you know, when suddenly there were changes which it was very difficult to explain what was causing that. Was it us? Was it her? You know, or something else? And that's a time when we were really clueless as to what was happening.
Yeah, I mean, sudden outbursts of anger, rebellion, not in any big way, but you know, there were things that we were just struggling with. Somehow we felt that we were the only ones who were going through this, because everybody else, friends, their children, everybody seemed to be doing normal and well. And this was something we just didn't know who we could even share this with, you know. And as always, you know, when you're put into a corner, you just look to God, cry out to God for help. Things start popping up. Help started coming from different corners, and one of the big things really was this parent and teen session. That, you know, just realizing that there were other children that were going through all this helped us so much. Apart from that, even we had another friend who had a daughter who has a daughter who's past all the teenage years and is much older now, but on one of our down days, they dropped in home, and we just happened to open up with them, and they walked us through their journey as well as helped us with what they did, which helped us so much. Probably, what were you going through? Because we were so unfamiliar with what you were going through, and we just couldn't understand what was happening in your life.
I mean, if I don't have a specific reason as to why I was like that, but I think for me, one of the major reasons was during middle school, I had a lot more restrictions put on me by my parents as compared to my friends. So in school, I was the different kid, the one who had strict parents and would not do a lot of the stuff that they would do, and that did not play out too well for me. And I think I blamed me being so different as compared to my classmates on my parents, and that could be a major reason as to why I got mad.
So one of the things that we realized is that children going through this teen period is having different pressures and challenges compared to what we went through when we were going through that same age. So we had to give more freedom than what we experienced at that time, and also trust that they would behave responsibly, and that's what we did, right? Little by little, we allowed her to do different things, give permissions, and we trusted that she would behave responsibly, and that's what we had. That's what we did.
Yeah, I mean, there were still a lot of things that personally I was not too happy to let go, but it just but we still did let loose that rope we had on her, so to speak, and really just trust God that it will all work out. Looking back, though we did have instances of issues again, but I think over time she did get into that responsible thing, understanding that what we have let her with is a privilege, and with that privilege also comes responsibilities, and I think she's handled that pretty well. Another thing that kept happening here was, like, we had our home sometimes would become big grounds for battles and arguments. I mean, battles in the sense of really arguments and flared up tempers, particularly between both of us, because I was at home a lot of the times to face or to say no to things. So in that time, we really needed to come up with strategies, because at some point we will just,
a battle plan.
Yeah, a battle plan or a strategy, because at some points, both of us just felt like giving up or running away, or, I mean, it was just crazy here.
So what I did, and possibly it was easier for me to do, was to stay out of this argument, right? And
no, or if the argument was between him and her, it was better that I don't hold sides with him. I would keep out of it, right? Yeah. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
One person.
That's one parent stays out of the argument, because it's not something that is reasonable, or it's not out of reason that these arguments are being made, but a lot of emotion, and therefore it's at least one of us, we stay out of it. It helps, because then we can be the sane voice in the midst of this argument. And after this argument, sometimes I would just take her out for a long drive, or go from something, do something so that there is time to cool down, and just be a little bit more calmer than what it would have been otherwise. So that, I think, really helped.
What do you say about that?
No, I mean, I think that really did make a difference, because otherwise for the child, it would feel like both the parents are against the child alone. And so because they would do this, and it was kind of very obvious that he was purposely staying out, because I would try to bring him in and he would like, I'm not in this, argue with her. But that does make a difference, because so when it would get like really heated up between us and I just wanted a break and I wanted to go out, I knew that he was still there and I could ask him to please like take me out. And I mean, if it was both of them against me, I wouldn't, or if I felt like that, I wouldn't be able to ask him because I would be mad at him too. And so having that split concept did help.
Yeah. I think one of the important things is to make it very clear, and not clear in the sense of what we say, but what we do. That our children, we really love our children, and whatever we do, even if it is restrictions and so on, that eventually they should know that it is because out of a lot of love and concern that we have for them, that we want them to do very well.
Yeah, I think something else that really did work looking back and even now is that we did make an extra effort to become, to get to know her friends and to be friends with them really. I told her that, she could call her friends over. This home, in a sense, became a kind of an open home for her to be able to call her friends anytime. And so it became something very nice because for her friends to come over and to feel comfortable here anytime, for even if it is just for fun, or sometimes they would get together to do their project. The good thing is that then I could relate to what she was saying. I could understand where she's coming from when she talks, and even because her friends knew us, it helped a lot in just even giving us favor with them and her. And the good thing is, even to this day, I can say that I have really good friends among her circle also.
One thing that I try to consciously do was, in the midst of all these differences and arguments that is going on, it's natural to speak negative, right? Because that's our emotion, because of these differences and disagreements that is happening. Right? Consciously made it a point to, in my mind and quietly, bless her, right? Because we have been called to be a blessing. And as parents, no matter what we are going through with our children, continue to bless them. And I think that is very, very important. And I've seen that even in a matter of few moments, as I quietly bless her, the environment changes. Yeah. God is at work, and that's something that I consciously practice, that we bless our children.
Yeah. I don't know this part. I wouldn't say that we have arrived really. I mean, there are still issues that we are dealing with, or things that we are not happy with, things like that. I think that will always be there with all of us. But in general, I mean, God has done such a wonderful work, and He started this good work, and we are so confident, much more confident, that He is able to complete that good work that He started, not just in her, even in us, in changing us too. Something that I keep saying here is that she has so much joy, and her joy really lights up our home, and we are really enjoying that. She's an encourager, a big hugger. She expresses her love so much that it's really, we are enjoying God's blessings in our children, through our children right now. And like I said, He started this good work. He will complete it. It's not that everything is perfect. We are still a work in progress. I think we will always be, but God is faithful.
Yes, indeed. God is faithful. So hope that was helpful. It was very encouraging for me to see them put it all together that way, and there is hope. I think some of you said, even in the answers that you gave for the exercise before this, which some of you shared on the chat with me, with us, I think it's important for us to trust God in all this, right? It's about us as much as it is about our children, right? And if we can be in it with them, I think we will see some parts of the completion, or complete the work that needs to be completed by God Himself. right? So this next segment, in fact, developing emotional health, is again very, very key. Like that was Asha and Ashok. I realized I didn't tell their names, but some of you already know. That's Ashok and Asha and their daughter Hannah. They have another son as well, an older son, and that was their problem, because they said the son was just so good. He was so obedient. He was never a hard teenager, and then came along the second daughter, and they were totally thrown out of their chairs. As you can see, they're very, very sweet parents. So even when Asha would say she lost it, I was wondering how lost is lost. I'm sure it can't be as lost as I get. But issues are the same in every home, right? But it's so good to see God's work in like she said, in the parents as well as the teenager. So this next segment is about developing emotional health, and this is very, very important for us to understand that is the crux of it all, right? In all these rules and regulations and this and that, and getting their studies in order and getting tuitions arranged, their emotional health. We know so many 20-year-olds who are brilliant. Parents have spent crores, they've gone to UK, they've come back, but guess what? They're going through depression, they're going through anxiety attacks, right? Their emotions are broken, their emotions are all over the place, and they're just not able to function. What is the point? What is the point of having an IQ of, I don't know, whatever that number is? What is the point of having them in the best universities? What is the point if their emotions are not stable, if their emotions are all over the place, right? So this is a very, very important, and that's why, if even the world has changed, right? Now every interview doesn't look at just the IQ, they also look at the EQ. Right? Even companies have changed and have understood that it's not just enough to look at IQ, but also EQ, emotional quotient. Why is that? That's because they've realized that there is absolutely no point of having a brilliant IIM, IIT graduate if their emotions are not stable and they're not able to make a decision, they're not able to hold their emotions stably even for one 24-hour period, right? So that's something that is very important. So in the segment of emotional health, one of the things we want to talk about is handling anger. And I think I mentioned this in the beginning. From the children's ministry to every other ministry that Mustard does, if there is any issues that we ask them, okay, raise of hands, what are the issues that you have? Even a 5-year-old will say, I have a problem with anger. Can you imagine? So it's not just teenagers, it's not just adults. That's a common thing. And why is that anger there, right? And how can we as parents help them control that, help them manage that, right? And a lot of things, also goes back to how we manage anger, how we model anger. A lot of the times parents tell, oh my goodness, they're using exactly the same words that I use when I'm angry. And that's why when we said that modeling values is very, very, very important as parents, right? So anger, and this is something this is not just to be used like the love languages, not just for children to parent. We also say use it or check with every relationship you have, even in your marriage. And if you were in the marriage workshop, you've heard this before. The way we express anger can be sort of divided into two ways, right? One is the hedgehog approach, and the other one is the rhino approach, right? So sometimes some of us, we just attack. The rhino has a horn, right? We just attack. Everything is to do with attack, right? And the children also show their anger like that. Like I said last week, sometimes if you go into a house, sometimes I say, we should have cameras in households. And then we should replay what happens, and then we can be like, oh my goodness, I was worse than the teenager in this scene, because we are worse than how they express anger. So coming back, it's very important to analyze and understand how do we express anger and why, right? The how is either as rhinos or as hedgehogs, and not just us. So even as teenagers, when we're thinking of our children, some of them just scream, 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 right? And the others just close up, They just close up. They don't want to talk about anything. They just go into their rooms. They give you the cold shoulder, and they just don't know how to express. So that's why we say rhinos and hedgehogs. So if I were to just say a rhino behavior is being aggressive, shouting and screaming, saying things we later regret, losing control completely, lashing out, accusing. How many children say, I hate you? You know, I don't remember saying that to my parents, like, ever, not even thinking that. In spite of my parents having some major issues, but today, even an 8-year-old is like, I hate you. You know, it comes out so easily. Lashing out and accusing, blaming everyone else, becoming explosive or irritable, becoming controlling and bossy. Right? This is the rhino behavior. The hedgehog behavior is burying the anger, trying to ignore our feelings, becoming sarcastic. A lot of us have that in our homes. Withdrawing behind an impenetrable wall, becoming cold and clinical, feeling nervous or fearful, wanting to run away and hide, and getting depressed. Right? This is different ways in which hedgehog behavior comes. Right? Both of these are not okay. Right? So even when you analyze, okay, how does my child express anger, or how do I express anger, the point is both of these are not healthy. Right? If we are angry about something, there is a godly way to deal with that anger. Right? So as parents, we need to be aware, where is this coming from? And like, Asha and Ashok was saying, if we have the blessing of husbands and wives, fathers and mothers being in the home, it's very important that one of us stay away, one of us stay sane and step out of the situation, because sometimes we just keep on arguing, we debate with the child, and we go beyond or say things beyond what we should say. Right? And this is where we have to deal with it in a mature manner. Right? So if they're angry, allow them, because some of us as Christian parents, we think any form of anger is just not okay. So if the child says anything, you are suppressing them. You're like, no, it's not okay for you to do that, it's not okay for you to say that. So before they can even express it, because mind you, even as adults, sometimes we don't even know how to articulate when we are emotional. Right? We say something, and then, let's say between a husband and a wife, we are angry, and I say something, and by the time Manoj tries to understand what I'm saying or why I'm angry, it's something else. I've started saying something, but it's actually something else. So as adults, if we take time to articulate and understand our own mind and thoughts and emotions, and speak in the right way, children, how much more? They'll be so confused. So they're saying something, they're meaning something else, they're trying to process the emotion they're feeling, they're trying to process the thoughts they're feeling. Say they come home after a fight with their best friend, and this is the age that their friends are very big for them. Right? So you and I can't say, oh, it's just your friend, it's okay, everything will be fine tomorrow. That just makes them more angry, and then they start lashing out at you. And then you're like, okay, what happened here? What did I do? And then it goes to something else and something else and something else. What I'm trying to say is, when they express anger, allow them to express it. I'm not saying allow them to break some things and throw some things and cut some things. I'm not saying that. But allow them to express it. Don't be quick to put words in their mouth and say, no, don't say that, right? Let them express it. Allow them to express it. Listen to them. Look in their eyes. All these things that we spoke about in communication is very important, because there is an emotion, there is a teachable moment right there. Right? And a lot of that anger and frustration they're feeling, you can almost like absorb it and listen to them. And once they finish their venting, you're able to help them to control or manage or understand what just happened. Right? And that's very important. I want to share an example that just happened yesterday in our youth group. This is a person or a youngster who's in her 20s. She's just turned 20, I think. So she was saying that one of her friends really betrayed her in some way. I think she went and said something about her, and she was very hurt. And this is her main inner circle. Okay, there are about 4 or 5 friends, and one friend out of that said something, and she said, I was so broken, I was so angry. I wanted to lash out at her, but I was thinking of all the things that God's been speaking to me, so I didn't say anything. I just went quiet. And all the other friends in that circle, like the other 3 or 4 friends, kept telling me, why are you not saying anything? That's so unfair what she's doing, and you should stand up for yourself, and you should this and you should that. But cut the story short, she didn't say any of that, right? Apparently, God ministered to her as she cried out and said, God, help me. Why is this happening? And all that. And she was able to go back and forgive that friend. And in that circle, everyone else who was watching, those friends who were watching, saying, what's wrong with you? Like, what are you saying? And so this kid could, this kid meaning the 20-year-old girl I'm talking about, could say that, what, it's God that's helping me, and I don't need to prove anything. It's okay. And she said, I could genuinely say that I wasn't making it up, or I wasn't trying to be that or anything. I could genuinely feel that because God gave me that strength, and that opened up many conversations in that circle. The kids started asking, what kind of God are you talking about? Or how can you say this? How can you let it go? Things like that. So what I'm trying to say is, when the children bring that home, it is very important that we as parents help them manage that anger. Help them understand. And all this comes in the non-agenda conversations, where all the reasons for the anger, the root for the anger comes out, right? Because if we don't enable them now, like Manoj was saying earlier, it can become really bad. Like for myself, I myself had a major issue with anger. When I was a teenager, I was at home, in fact, just for 5 years. Before that, I was in the boarding school. Both my parents struggled with alcohol, and both my father and my mother, both of them are no more now. But it was very tough for me, because I was like, they're not there for me, I can't talk to them, and I used to get very angry. Like, I used to grit my teeth. So even now, when I get angry and if I grit my teeth, it's like deja vu, it goes back, and I'm very quick to say, sorry, Lord, because I don't want to go back there. But when I finished that stint at home and I left home, which I hated, I just wanted to leave home. Like Manoj said, that's one thing I used to always say, I just want to get out of home. This is the worst place. Every other place could be better than this. Those are thoughts that I have thought. And I left home to go to Delhi. And once I started being on my own, and I started living my life, the anger towards my parents only increased, because their alcohol never went down. But all that anger was taken out into my workplace. So when I was a manager for the first time and I had 30 people reporting into me, I still remember my first upward appraisal. Every single one of them pointed out my anger. They said, you're great in this, you're great in that, you're very understanding, you're a team player, you do everything. Oh, everything's great to hear. But that one thing that they said, that you get angry, and in your anger you say things. So I remember the first appraisal I did, and the person told me, I gave him one big lecture. The second person came and said the same thing. I shortened the lecture, but still I justified what I was doing. The third person, the fourth person, the fifth person, every single one of them, they use different language, but they said, you get angry very fast, you're very short-tempered. And I hated hearing that, because that's not the person I wanted to be. I wasn't a believer at that time. I didn't know anything that I'm telling you now. I didn't know how to deal with it. But yeah, in a worldly way, I said, okay, I'm going to change. And I made one big poster, do not be angry. And I posted it on my office wall. Of course, that didn't work. Only Jesus works. But, that was many years later that, God has enabled me to manage that anger, and not say things or not hurt people, not break people down by my anger. And I'm not saying I'm fixed completely. It keeps coming back. I have to keep going back to God. But why I said that story is how we enable our teenager to manage their anger now is going to help them in everything that is to come. And anger is a big one as far as emotional health is concerned, right? Anger is just one of the aspects, but it is a very big aspect, because that is the way they express rejection. They express lack of self-worth. They express comparative between them and their friends. The way they express is anger. Either they go totally quiet, so passive aggression happens, or complete opposite, that is fully aggressive behavior happens at home. So whatever it is, please don't leave it like that. Take help. It is not shameful to take help, parents. And the very fact that you guys are here is great. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. But even this, this is a general forum. But if you need to speak to someone, individually, do that. It is okay. There is no shame in saying that, as a mother, I don't know what to do anymore. I need help. It's okay. First you cry out to God, and then God will bring the right people to help you. So that's something that we wanted to, share. And the next part, the segment Manoj is going to take us through, is resolving conflict. And so in that anger, in that frustration, in conflicts at home, how do we resolve it? How do we ourselves as parents approach it? And how do they, or how do we enable them to approach it? Right? So over to Manoj to finish this segment.
Yeah, I hope you're doing okay. I know it's a lot of content, but this is a 5-week course, so we're trying that you would get the best out of 3 weekends. So you may feel a bit of overload, but then feel free to ask questions in case you're not able to process it right now. With regards to conflict resolution, I just want to touch on 6 helpful things that you can keep in mind, just to keep it short and sweet. First thing, learn to separate the issue from the emotion. Identify what the issue is actually. What is the reason that there is a conflict between you and the teen, for example? Okay, you need to be able to identify what is the root problem. Because many times, if we are honest, it's because we feel that our rules have not been obeyed, and hence we get into parent mode, and then we try and rule over our kids, but that's not helpful. So always identify the issue, try and separate, and then work on that particular route. The second thing, like we discussed last week, the teenager's brain is developing, and so as an adult, when we want a logical conclusion to a particular conversation, our teens are not seeing it that way. They want to just have a conversation without any necessary conclusion. Okay, so find a time that is suitable for you and your teen to discuss that conflict. Now that time may not suit you as a parent. Let me repeat that again. It may not be before your bedtime, as an example. Your teen might want to wake up at 1 in the morning and have a chat. That is the world that they're living in today. Now, as a parent, if you say that I'm too tired, I don't have time for your stories, you've lost that relational connect with your child. So you begin to see very quickly that depending on where you are in your relationship with a parent, with your child, you need to be able to put that little extra to reach out and enter their world. Okay, so find a time and a place where both of you are not stressed, where you're relaxed, and then have a conversation. Okay. The third thing that is helpful is, like I mentioned in the last segment, see yourselves as on the same side, not against each other. What that does is, you will seldom start attacking each other, but you would rather have a discussion. That makes a huge difference. And this goes for both parent as well as child. And bear in mind, these things take time. These are not things that will happen overnight. You need to start working on it. But over time, these things begin to help. With God's help, we're able to see ourselves on the same side. So learn to have a discussion rather than attack each other. A question is not necessarily your child trying to undermine your authority. Learn to encourage questions. Especially with Indian parents, Indian homes, generally, we don't like questions. You listen to what I tell you, obey. If you don't, I beat you back in black and blue. That seems to be the way many parents have raised their children up, and It's not a surprise that children turn back and rebel and back answer, and at the first instance they want to just get out of the home because it's just not the place they want to be. So learn to hold a conversation, and this is where those skills come into play. Be a good listener. Seek first to understand before being understood. Don't interrupt. Somebody mentioned the 17-second timer. Maybe it's helpful to keep the clock before you and say, okay, my next goal is 17.5 seconds. Okay. So something like that. I mean, you got to work it out in a way that, it'll work for you and your team. So discuss rather than attack. Number 4, this is a big one. And I know many parents struggle with this. If you are wrong, you got to learn to say you're sorry. I'm not even going to ask how many of you find it difficult, because I know a majority find it difficult. But this is a great relational connecting point. Because remember the first session, when you model that you truly are sorry for something, chances are your child is going to pick it up. So if you truly believe, and don't fake it, mean it when you say, hey, I'm sorry, I should not have spoken that way. Or I compared you with your sibling, I should not have done that. Or I compared you with somebody in your class, I'm so sorry, I didn't really mean it. Or whatever, I don't know. I mean, you'll have to find a way to convey that to them. And then work on that aspect. Take it back to God and ask God to change your heart. Because out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So it's ultimately pointing to our own hearts. So learn to apologize if we know that we have got it wrong. Number 5, I think Lindsay touched on this. There is no perfect solution many times. Okay? Find midpoint where there is peace and harmony in the home. Start with that. You may have an ideal somewhere down 10 steps. Keep that there. Today, start with step 1 and say, this is a good place. From here, we can work. Okay? But keep that goal ahead, saying that someday, God, with your help, I want to be able to come to that place. So always look for finding a midpoint. Okay? Number 6, something that we always insist and encourage parents. Be open-minded to your children. Please don't shut them out. Please do not think that you know everything and they don't. Chances are they know a lot more than you. And that takes humility to acknowledge, saying that I don't know. Especially when it comes to the internet, I confess I don't know many things. So I get both my girls and say, guys, you teach me. And I actually enjoy it. And I'm sure many parents, you have the same experience. They teach us. They're so quick with finding out and troubleshooting. So involve them in little things like that, where it becomes fun. It's not all serious around the home. So I, as a father to children, I go to them and I say, hey, how does this thing work? And then they show me and they take me through that. They help me navigate a few screens. But what happens? End of the day, a relationship is being built. Friendship is being built. Now, all of this is not possible if you don't have time for them. Okay? So you need to learn to take time out and be there for your children as much as you can. So those are 6 helpful principles that you can keep in mind and work on it. With God's help, you can take that forward. Now, I want to also talk about one other thing with regards to handling stress. Now, as a parent, we understand some of you may be going through some very turbulent times, depending on what stage of life you're at. And if you are not 2 parents together in the marriage, if it's a single parent, then chances are the pressure is incredibly high, and we're very sensitive about that. But depending on what level you're at, stress is something that some amount of stress is inevitable. Okay? And here's something that will help you. It's very simple. Please don't be under pressure to think that you have to be a perfect parent, which means please do not see yourself as an imperfect parent today, because God doesn't see you like that. So don't buy into that lie. And don't aspire to become like somebody else in your parenting. Trust God that He's got a very unique style of parenting for you. Keep that, because that's a mindset shift that will help you to manage your personal stress if you are somebody who's very stressful and anxious, and also help you to hold a conversation with your teen. Because when you have stress in your life, you're actually passing that on to your teenager. So that's the first thing. Um, Another very helpful thing. I know some parents are very driven for success, especially academic success. Okay, we both have done fairly well in academics, um, but something that we agreed very early on, even before we had children, that we would not raise our children purely on academics. That's an agreement that we made amongst ourselves. But we wanted to provide them a holistic development where they're exposed to different things in life. Not necessarily Christian. I will go on record and say this because I believe we have Christianized our children so much that they're useless in the world to a large extent. So, what we're trying to say is teach them the principles of the Word of God. Okay? But like I mentioned very briefly last week, and this is very helpful, the Bible says, train the child in the way that he should go. So it's our responsibility to find their personality and train them in that area and trust that God will enable them to walk that walk. So our role is to train them in that way, not to, saturate them with the Bible, but have no practical knowledge about how to live in this world. Okay, so this is very important. So in that context, through your own life, and I can talk for myself, I share with them a lot of the mistakes I've made in my own life. Teach them. I also share with them about success. We both share about success that we have both experienced in our corporate workplace and otherwise, even academics. What are we trying to model for them? Success and failure is a part of life. Please do not shelter them from that, because if you put pressure on them saying that you have to be an A student or an A plus student all through your life, sooner or later they're going to go out into the world where they're going to be heartbroken the first time they experience disappointment and failure. So model for them that life is a combination of success and failure. So more than speaking, model for them through your own mistakes. That requires a lot of vulnerability to say, hey, here's my messing up moments. This is what I learned, and I'm sharing it with you so that you don't go ahead and make the same mistake. Same thing with success. Hey, this is what happened in my life. This is what I learned. This is how God humbled me, whatever it may be, that your personal experience. So what are we saying? When you share testimony with them, you build relationship. It's authentic and it's convincing. So that's very important. Another very important tip. Praise them for the effort and not for the results. No matter how small their effort may be, even if it does not match up to your standards, thank them and praise them for it. I think we can all do a lot better in this. Many of us are performance driven, result oriented. If the result doesn't match our expectation, we are just not happy and we make it known. But just think about what's happening in your child's life. So that's another helpful thing to keep in mind when we're talking about managing stress, both for ourselves as well as for our children. Avoid comparisons as far as possible. Somebody had a question about comparisons, but we'll get to that. We'll answer in the Q&A section. But avoid comparisons between siblings as well as with other children. Find something in your child to appreciate them for. Accept them, affirm them, acknowledge them, praise them, and be genuine in it. Because if you have not accepted your children, which means you have not instilled in them a sense of authentic being, then no matter what you praise them for, it will not sit in place because you have not accepted them for who they are. And I want to clarify that means not performance, but value. You value them for who they are. If you haven't done that as a parent, no matter what you say, no matter what gifts and presents you give them, it will not sit in place. So that's where it's again coming back. You remember the wheel? The hub is love. The hub is relationship. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have a relationship with your child, chances are the first instance they have, they'll say, I don't want the money. I want my parents to be with me. Presence matters more. Presence, Presence. It values more than presence, Presents. Please remember that. Okay. Create space. I think we touched on this in the last segment. Let it be a fun environment. So last evening, we all went out for ice cream. I was a spur of a moment kind of a plan. So I said, hey, let's go for ice cream. Yeah, it turned out very late at night, but then it's okay. Once in a while, it's okay. But what I'm saying is, let it be increasingly a fun place where children want to say, hey, I love my home. Because all of us are sitting at home now with COVID, and few of us are moving around, but mostly people are sitting at home, right? So it can get quite boring, right? So try and create little things that spur of the moment, spontaneous. Get creative. God is creative. Ask God for creative thoughts. He'll give it to you, and just flow with it. Flow with that. Lastly, I just want to leave this. Have you ever asked your child how he or she is doing? You'll be amazed when you start building relationships. They will open up to you. Start talking to them about what they fear, what they're worried about, what they go to bed with at night in terms of thoughts. If your child comes to you with a bad dream, don't dismiss it. Talk to them about it at an opportune time. Pray with them and declare and bless them, like we saw in the video, like Ashok was saying. Bless your child. And that's something that's very important. So these are just some helpful things just to help manage stress, because we know it's on the rise, especially in an urban setting. But all of this is tied into the love of God that He's already poured out. So the Word of God, prayer, your marriage, again, where two parents are involved, you need to increasingly be in agreement. This is not the role for one parent to play. For single parents, like we said, we are sensitive to that situation. But in that case, we truly believe God gives the grace of both the father and the mother for that single parent. Ultimately, it's God who gives it, right? So that's a little bit on just handling stress. And I think there's a video that we want to play. Tijin, if you could kindly play that for us.
It's just a short video. So we just thought it was really important to hear from maybe another person as well.
Selves now and in the future.
I think the scary thing sometimes about being a parent is not that our children don't listen to us, but they really do, that they hear and watch every word. We can spend years telling them to be kind to others, but if they see us tear our husband or wife down in front of them, they'll remember how we actually lived. We can say the importance of saying sorry. Say sorry, but if they don't hear us say sorry. I once heard of a father say, I've never apologized to my children for anything, nor would I. You could fear a man like that, but it's hard to respect him. But we mustn't go on a guilt trip over this. It's fine for kids to see us having rows and disturbances and bust-ups. That's family life. It's life, for goodness sake. But they must see how we deal with that. Forgiveness, grace. And, this can become particularly difficult when parents are split up. And the temptation can be for us to bring down our husband or wife or partner and say negative things to our child. But I think that is always a bad thing. We might not love each other, but our kids still love both their mother and father. And I think we are wise if we don't play that game. Actually, as far as possible, help them to increase respect for their mum, for their dad. They are watching us, aren't they? And learning.
We want to run through 6 principles.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had a small exercise at the end of this, but we probably won't do that because we want to give more time for you to ask questions or probably just recap. So that exercise is there in the WhatsApp group. We would really encourage you to go back and just ponder on those questions, see what can be done in terms of specific to resolving conflict. How can we resolve conflict? Yes, we've heard many parents say, all this is fine, at least if they would talk, but, they just don't talk, so we don't even know where to start. And we understand that, right? And like we've heard from the video as well as what Manoj was saying, don't go on the guilt trip. Don't go on that trip of, oh gosh, I've messed it totally up now. I don't even know where to start, right? And that's where God comes in. I don't think any of us can do this without God. And God is sovereign. He knows the end from the beginning. Right where you are, He can help, right? Whatever circumstance you are, whatever way the relationship between you and your child, God is just right there to help us, right? So take all this that you've heard, take it back to God, pray, ask Him for ways and means, and you will be surprised. I think many parents say it's not going to work with my child, and I really urge you to not say that, because then we will never try. And maybe it's something you have tried before, but can we try and try and try, till we see our children slowly start responding, right? So I mean, we are both very confident because we have been walking with teenagers and parents for a few years, and it is so beautiful to see how the relationship, the family, slowly starts changing. This is the very people that said that it's just not going to work in our home. You don't understand my daughter. She's not like what you're saying or what you're seeing. You have such great daughters. Wait till you come to our home, right? But so it's not like that. It's just saying, Lord, I put my hands up. I need your help. And He will be right there. So we're very confident that, God's going to help each of us, fathers, mothers, and the children, through this process. So we're just going to open it out for questions or thoughts or things that stood out. It just helps at the end of hearing so many things when you just say it back as to, okay, these were the things that really stood out for me that I'm going to go and apply to my own parenting style. So we're just going to open it out for that like we did last week. So who's going to start? And we can just spend the next 20-25 minutes in this. And like we said, if there is any question, please feel free either to type it out or speak up. One of the questions that Manoj was mentioning that one of the parents wrote was this whole thing of applying different boundaries to different children depending on how they respond back. Right? I wouldn't say it's wrong to do that because they understand things differently, or their capabilities in certain areas are different, and we have to be unique in our parenting style with both of them. But at the same time, we cannot be seen as partial. We cannot be seen as unfair, right? That is very, very detrimental to the child. So it's very important, there's no big, like we said, there's no rocket science or a big theorem that we can give you, but explain boundaries to your children, right? And explain it to each of them. We mentioned this last week as well. If you have more than one child, spend individual time with them, right? It's not enough that you spend the time together. If you have two children and you spend time together, that's not enough. Spend time individually with them. What I do, we have two daughters, so what I do is I actually sleep with them at different times, and that sleep time when we go to bed, that 2-3 hours before sleeping it's amazing, because they tell me all that they're going through, the fears they have, the thoughts they have, or things they were hurt about. I mean, recently they were saying something about, something about Manoj that they were hurt about, and I was like, what? You don't know Dada, he's just like that. And then I didn't dismiss it. I know where Manoj was coming from, and I had the freedom to bring it up with him, and then he brought it up with them, and we were able to resolve that. Right? So those are the times these things come out. Otherwise, it comes out in spurts, it comes out in behavior, it comes out in things that are suppressed, and it can come later as not very nice things. So I think spending that time individually with the different children that God has given you really helps, and explaining to them. For instance, I explained to Zara why, like Eva, for instance, the older kid always says, you don't correct the younger one enough. You just don't tell her enough. You're always telling me. So in a certain situation, the first person you get at is the older kid, right? That's a natural sort of response. whatever the situation is. So for her, it's like you just don't tell her enough, and it's always me you pick on. You don't even know what the situation is, and blah 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 blah. I'm sure all that sounds really familiar. But we spend time with them individually and together, and explain to them why we do what we do, right? And reassure, reiterate the good qualities that they have. Because anytime you put them down, or you're trying to correct them and they're seeing it as putting them down, they also want to keep hearing what they're good at. Like we said last week, if you give one negative comment, in the sense one correction or one sentence, you give 5 affirming words, 5 positive sentences, only then can they keep going, strong in that love and acceptance foundation. Like Manoj was saying, they need to feel accepted for who they are, not to settle there, but that's where they start with. That's where we all start with God, right? God says, you come as you are. And then from there, he starts a work in us. So the same approach towards our children as well. Right. So just to answer that question, that's something we would suggest, that you spend time individually with them, explain why you have boundaries. Yes, all this takes a lot of time. There is no shortcut. But if God has blessed you with children, if he trusts you with these children, I always say, the Great Commission and all these things that God has asked us to do, the one thing that we know that he's going to ask us when we meet him face to face is what we have done with our children, because he's given them to us, right? Even if you don't go save 100 souls or preach the gospel or make disciples, if you can make these children that he has given you disciples of Jesus and love them, then I think that would be great to be able to say on that last day when you meet Jesus. Right. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that could be one way in which you can approach that question. Okay. Anyone else? Any questions? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. It's just a comment. God doesn't build a life in one day. Okay. He builds it line upon line, precept upon precept. Okay. So don't be in a rush to get all the answers for your questions. Trust that God and God alone will give you the wisdom in the way that you and I can understand it. Okay. These are just forums where we are having a discussion. While we encourage the questions, you may not go from here with all your answers. Okay. But don't be disappointed. God understands where you are. Okay. So I just want you to be realistic about what you're journeying with. Okay. It takes a life to get to know people. And so we are again, talking about relationship. Pay attention personally to your relationship with who God is, with who Christ is, and then let it flow from there. That's the first thing. To also talk about what Lindsay was responding to, that question on comparisons. Something that I've observed, when children are going through deep emotions, don't try and bring correction to them. Affirm their emotion. That is not easy to do. If you're an impatient person, you will struggle to do that. So what should you ask God? Make me a patient person, right? Affirm their emotion. You know what happens when you affirm? You're angry, you're scared, you're unsure. When you start affirming that, they feel authentic as individuals. That's where it all starts from. So don't try and rush and bring correction to them. Okay, that's our default response, but that's where we need to start seeing the change. Affirm, what is this child going through? What's my child going through? What am I going through? As parents, we have our own emotions, right? So all this takes God's strength, a lot of prayer, a lot of time with the Word of God. It's not going to come just by memorizing 6 principles. So we just want you to be realistic about a lot of these things. Ultimately, it is God who will bring the increase and bring the growth that you and I desire. So yeah, leave it open.
Anyone, you want to unmute and just share?
Lindsay, I wanted to ask a question actually. What do you do when your children want to be, they want to get exposed to the classical dance or the secular stuff to watch? and you want them to experience and have a journey with Christ on one hand, and on the other hand you want them to be have an encounter and walk with God. So these are two extreme polar opposites, right? And especially when we have had the encounter very late in life and the children have seen you, allowing them to get exposed to all that, especially the classical dances or the secular stuff, and then you put a break on it, not a sudden break, probably a very gradual break. But do you agree to let them experience it on their own, or what do you do in such situations?
Yeah, I think we touched on that, Reba. Just to reiterate, don't look for an ideal solution to every problem. Okay? Start with where you and your child are. Now, the very fact that you've come to a realization of certain truths, please do not expect your child to also understand it the same way. Learn to hold space for each other, which means allow the other person to have an experience which is very different to yours. Okay? Now, that you cannot do if you're not depending on God. And I'm talking about all of us. If I'm not personally depending on God, I will expect my child to have the same experience as myself. And that is unfair. Because then I'm essentially stripping my child of his or her uniqueness. God wants to do a unique work in my child's life. But here, as a parent, I want to play God to my child. So here's the thing, love your child. I know it's hard, it's not easy. It's not easy, especially when they want to get exposed to things that you and I know are not right. So trust God. Find a solution that is midpoint. Like I said, keep your ideal maybe 10 steps ahead. You know that that's where you want to get, but not at the cost of a relationship. So start with step one. Today, what works for both of us? Let's work on that. And don't keep bringing up this thing that, hey, I want you to be there. I want you to be there. No. That's where we do a lot of damage. Keep that vision between you as parents. Pray for them, bless them, declare it over them, but encourage them, support them. Always keeping that vision 10 steps ahead, saying, hey, I want to see my child there. And God knows that. He's going to get you through there because He has plans to prosper and give you a hope and a future, not to harm you. So please do not forget who God is, right? So always point yourself back to God's nature, point your children back to God's nature by the way we start modeling the value. So whatever you do, don't lose the relationship. That's where the emotions play such a big part. And when we are busy, we don't have time for emotion. No drama in the house. I want results. That's how many parents are raising up their children. So what's going to happen is just a lot of fear, a lot of rebellion, and they don't want to see your face. And that's essentially what's going to happen. So
Having said that, Reba, there are obviously some things, it's situation based, right? Some things that's why we always say choose your battles. Some things that you just cannot allow, right? Now that you know, some things that you just cannot allow. And those are areas where God has to give us the discernment. But when I say not allow, it might take days and days and days of prayer as well as discussions before they might even come to considering what you are saying. But if that has to be done, that has to be done, right? But for instance, let me give you an example. Again, even in our Christian circles, not everybody necessarily agrees that classical dance has an issue. Yoga. In fact, the example I was going to give you was of yoga. We know people in our own circles who may do yoga. So we're not here to judge because we all have our journey with God, and God takes us through that journey. He allows us that space the same way we also need to allow space for others. So I'm just saying this as an example because it's sort of similar to what you just said. Now, yoga is something that we are clear is not something we indulge in as children of God, right? So this is not a session on why yoga and why no yoga, but so as parents, we came to an understanding that that is not something that we as children of God should indulge in. And therefore, when our children were young, from the time they were young, that is something we were clear, some value systems that we as a family follow, right? So when I think Eva was in LKG or UKG, they started yoga. This is in their previous school. They started yoga in their class. It was a subject. So we spoke to the class teacher and we said, no, we don't want our child to go through it. So please let her just stay in class. The other children can go. And the class teacher said, okay, this was UKG actually. And standard one, again that happened. Again we told the class teacher, and that was fine. You know, she would stay in the class, she would do coloring or whatever, and she was absolutely fine. And we explained to her. So this was not even in her class 1, she clearly knew that she was not going for yoga because it dishonored God. She was very clear because we explained to her, we sat with her, we explained what it is in her own, you know, way. She understood that much, and she had absolutely no problems. Otherwise children can be a little they would be like, everybody's going, you're not letting me do it. I mean, that age group is actually a little easier than the teenage years. So that was in class 1. Now class 2 came, and we thought this whole thing is going to just get repeated. We wrote to the class teacher. The class teacher said, no, I cannot allow it. So then we said, it happened in UKG, it happened in class 1, what's going on? So he said, no, you have to come and meet the principal. I cannot allow that. She has to do yoga. It's a graded subject. And then we're like, okay, what is this now? So we go and meet the principal, hoping, of course, we pray about it. We, and it was already, the school year had already started. We all know how difficult it is to get admissions. So we go there. And the principal was quite dismissive of what we had to say. And he said, well, you parents don't know anything. Like I do. He is a Christian. And he said, I do yoga every day at 4 in the morning. So now, case was closed. So we didn't have the reasons that we had, right? And he said, I don't know what's wrong with you. You guys are so closed and this and that and everything. So it wasn't basically getting anywhere. And he said, this is the curriculum that has been decided by the school and it's a graded subject. I cannot allow. So then we said, you know what, let her get F or G or Z or whatever. It doesn't matter. As parents, we don't want her to do it. He said that cannot be allowed. You have to choose. If she is in the school, she has to go to the class and she has to do the whole thing. And we were obviously quite disappointed with that meeting. But then we came back, we're driving back, and we were, amongst ourselves speaking. I said, that's really strange because it wasn't like this. I wonder what's happening and all that. And we said, okay, maybe, by next year we need to slowly look at shifting her from the school. That was our discussion. And we come back home and there's this class 2 kid eagerly waiting to know what happened and what did the principal say. And then so we narrated to her, and she was like, that's very rude. That's the first thing she said. That's very rude. So I said, no, Mutta, it's okay. I mean, he has to follow the rules, and there's so many children, he can't make exceptions. So we're trying to milden it. And she said, Mama, I'm not going to do yoga. So then we said, no, it's okay. You just go and, whatever, if they chant something, don't just pray to Jesus. And, we're trying to say all this. And she said, no, I will not do it. I will not do anything that dishonors Jesus. And she said these very words. And we were like, okay, now what do we do? I mean, now we're at a dead end. So I remember we spoke to our pastor that time. And he said, when children are at that age, they're very impressionable. If we are saying and we are sort of changing the boundaries a little bit and saying, okay, we just have to adjust and sort of be okay with it, it may confuse her. So maybe you want to consider, maybe changing schools, or I don't know, pray about it. But obviously changing schools is almost like unthinkable at that time of the year, June, July, right? Schools are already closed for admission. So, but when he also said that, we said, okay, let's pray and think. Because if they're older kids, if they're teenagers, say in 8th standard, 9th standard, and we have, parents who have children in that very same school, and they are in 8th and 9th, and they have figured ways and means, of sitting in the yoga class, but not doing it, right? But they're old enough to understand that. Right? So not every parent do we say you have to do this or you have to do that. In our case, we felt led to at least start looking for a school. We were convinced that, okay, we're not going to get any admission now. I don't even know why we're looking, but we said, okay, let's try. To cut the story short, miraculously we got admission in another school, and that's where they are now, and we were able to open up and say it's because of yoga, and it's not something that we want for our children, right? So just to say an example, in our case we did that, but in another case where, you know, like we know parents whose children are in the 8th standard, 9th standard, they couldn't do that. It's just a matter of another 2 years. You know, I just want her to get through. It's okay, let her just go through, because it is a part of the curriculum. And like someone said, you know, the Bible says to be in the world but not of the world. So that's why it's very important to explain to our children why and what implication each of these things have, right? So there are some things that you need to cut. You know, for instance, if your 22-year-old comes and says, you know, he or she wants to get married to a non-Christian, an unbeliever, that is not biblical, right? So those are things, again, you need to negotiate. You can't just say no, because they might just walk out of the house. But there are certain things that are a big no-no, and that has to be very clearly communicated. But there are certain things, like Reba said, we as parents ourselves have come to the Lord later. We ourselves have exposed them to different things, and now we're at a place where we understand that, okay, now this is not pleasing to God. Now how do I do it? And God has room. He's given room for everything, right? He knows. So allow him to do it his way. And like Manoj said, we can't push and shove the children and say, no, just do it because I'm telling you to. So have those discussions, have those negotiations. And as you go on, slowly, you will see that they will understand, they will accept, you know, and in all this, please pray more than anything else. You know, pray for your children, with your children. That's another thing that we do a lot less of as Christian parents. And I don't see how we can, you know, successfully parent our children if we don't have prayer. You know, and like what Ashok was mentioning, bless them. Even if you're angry, you have to train yourself to be able to bless them and speak positively over them, and you will see the fruit. Yeah. Okay, anyone else?
I just wanted to add to Reba's question, because when I was young, I learned classical dance. So what you have to do at the beginning of the dance is that you have to prostrate before the idol, right? So you have to do that. And I think at a point, I myself realized that that was not what I wanted to do. And it was only because my parents were reiterating the importance of God's commandments in my life. And I loved classical dance. And for Jessica, who is not a teen anymore, she turned 20. When she was 12 and 13, I think there was just so much of influence in the schools to listen to Western music, which was vulgar in lyrics, which was vulgar in their videos. And I think the very first time someone told her to watch something, and I looked at her and I said, "What are you watching?" She said, my neighbor friend, she asked me, she said, "It's a really nice song." And it was one of the Shakira songs, right? So like it was so peppy and nice, and then I blew it. But I still remember, I probably won't do that with my other 3 kids. I'll know how to handle it. But I remember sitting her down and telling her the importance of you know, keeping your eyes clean. You know, it's the light of the body. And what happened is that I was very strict till about 15, 16, 17 as to what kind of music she listened to. I did allow her to listen to secular music, provided the lyrics were good and the videos were clean. Right. So like Lindsay and Manoj were saying, you can't Christianize everything. But yes, worship music till 12. And then I slowly let go of the reins. Today, I know my daughter will never watch a video like that, ever. You know, she has very clean taste in music, clean taste in movies. And I attribute that only to the power of prayer. Because whenever your kids come up to you with these kind of choices, you just have to ask God to make it revolting for them. You know, tell God, you know, just let them not even want to do that. You know, let them not even desire to see that. And another thing is to keep communication open. That's so important for teenagers. Like Lindsay was saying, they come in only at 12 o'clock in the night. They come in at 1 o'clock, and you just have to get up and listen to them. Right? So love and prayer, yeah, absolutely, with strict boundaries up to a certain age, and then let it go. They will just choose the right thing by God's grace.
Yeah, thanks, Tina.
I had a question.
Yes.
For Manoj. Manoj mentioned that, you know, let the teenagers make decisions for themselves. Is that like a blanket kind of a thing, or is there something that you can put more context to? Because are teenagers, equipped yet to make all decisions for themselves? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, it depends. Thanks, Caroline. Depends on what age your child is, and again where you are as a parent.
He's a
Um,
14-year-old.
yeah. So, like I said, see, these are not written in stone. These are just helpful things that you and I can consider. Ultimately, like I reiterated, it's based on the Word of God. God gives the strength, the wisdom, the discernment to know what to do and when to do it. So, having said that, um, allowing them to make their decisions. As adults, I hope we know decisions that are not costly, which means it's not going to cost them something, really big in terms of, their future, or, it's not a huge financial thing. I think those things pretty much you and I would know, right? So if it's a harmless thing, like for example, choosing a set of clothes, okay? Now, as long as it's not, exposing and vulgar, and see, these are Christian values we've all grown up with, right? There's a bit of give and take, and I think between a mother and a child, I think those are permissible. So those are areas where you can allow them to, make their choices, or they want to streak their hair, maybe one day blue, another day red. Now that's not worth getting into a fight or an argument about, okay? Because that's not, you're not going to win that relationship, right? Like I said, keep that relationship alive, because God is relational, and if we need to display that nature more and more, we need to always keep our children as the adults that they're going to become, not the children that they are today. And for that, we need to be able to invest in that relationship. So those are little examples of allowing them to make their little choice. Or I know certain teenagers want to do up their room. Our own girl, she goes into one room and she says, I wanted this color and that color. Now, as parents, we've chosen a certain color for the walls, right? We can't change it overnight. But we allow her to put her little flowers and little angels and whatever she wants to do. The other day, she put up some lights in her room. It's okay, it's no problem. So, things like that, love them so that we mentioned, let the home be a place of fun where they can explore. And as they explore, they will begin to realize, hey, this actually is not good. So, what's happening internally, they're able to distinguish right from wrong. It's an internal process. Now, the other side of it is things that are a no-no. Like, for example, that when the kids are old enough, 20 plus or whatever, I mean, nowadays they possibly start even earlier. They want to get married. Now, marriage with an unbeliever is a no-no. Now, having said that, you are convinced they're not. So then all you can do is pray, have a discussion, but ultimately let them know that you love them, even if they choose to go and get married to somebody. It's hard, it's not easy. But what's the point we're trying to make? There's only that much you and I can control our children. Once they are teenagers, once they're adults, I think their major, influences should have already been embedded. Now, if it hasn't, then prayer. I believe prayer, and continue to reach out to them in love. I think never stop doing that. Never sideline them. Never, make statements about them, because the power of life and death is in the tongue. And if they don't agree with your decisions, don't say unkind things to them. That's something that, in our counseling sessions, we see a lot of children who have been, spoken over, such harsh things by their parents. And the scars of that are deep down in the spirit. And then there's a whole different counseling session for that, for them to come to a place of healing and restoration. So I hope that helps you a little bit, Caroline, in terms of just allowing,
Sure.
give them
It is.
space. You decide what is, it's harmless, it's okay. I mean, let them enjoy it, it's okay.
And one way of helping them, what the reason why we talked about decision making is, we don't want them to be like robots, right? We want them to be able to make decisions. So it is enabling them to make decisions. So some decisions they can make. and some of it, even if it goes wrong, it's okay. So those are the areas that we as parents need, need a lot of strength and grace and understanding, and ask God to give you that understanding, because a lot of times we parents assume that our children can't do it. I've met a lot of parents, and even now when we receive some statements from you, you all of you are, or some of you are at that place where you don't really trust your child, right? But you expect them to trust you. No, that's not even fair, right? At any level. Of course, we are the adult, they are the child. So they have to start experiencing trust from us in order for them to trust, because that is modeling trust, right? So which means you've got to choose a few things that they can choose, they can decide. If they're saying, oh, I don't know, then sit with them, discuss, why don't we do this, why don't we do that, and enable them to make a decision. So it's in the decision making that we were saying it's very important to help them, because it's a lot easier for us to just decide for them. But I think that's a huge damage that we do for our children. And even in our decision making, say we go for a holiday, or say we're inviting someone home, we've come to a place, and our children are just 13 and 10. We don't do it without asking them. It's like in marriage, we tell the husband and the wife not to make any decisions without asking each other. So we make it together. Someone wants to come home, as much as I know Manoj won't mind, I still don't say yes unless I discuss with him. Either we've forgotten something or whatever it is, right? That is just honoring each other and honoring that relationship. The same way we do that even with our children. So any decision that we make, we're not saying you ask them. Of course, in our case, we actually ask them even some very important decisions, because we believe they hear from God better than us many times. But even in including them in that decision, right? So then they see a modeling of how we decide what we decide, and that way they're maturing. They may not be actively engaging in that decision, but when you share with them, they're learning, they're growing. You are sowing seeds of how we need to decide and how decisions are made in a godly manner, right? So that's I just wanted to add that in the whole decision making process. Let's do like maybe one more anything, sharing or question or whatever.
Vincy, if just like helping Caroline's question, like what we did with our daughter, Jessica is homeschooled. So we had enrolled her with the UK university. We had enrolled her. So after 2 years, she herself said, "It would be better, Mama, if I take teachers, private tutors from here. It will be cheaper comparative to what I'm doing from there." And we respected her decision because she analyzed, and she was able to do the but I was apprehensive that is it a right decision, will I be making a right decision? But we trusted her, we and my husband trusted her, and we decided to do that. And now when I see, we find out that it was a right decision, otherwise we would have been in a big mess. Okay, so that decision what she took was a very good decision. And recently she was struggling with one of the teacher, and she was like too much bothered, she was like walking around tense. And then I sat and discussed with her what is the issue, and she said, I'm struggling with English, I'm not able to do it, I'm not able to write. And then one day something happened with her teacher, and the teacher called me. And then I realized it's the problem with the teacher. Teacher was the problem, that she was getting bothered so much that she was not able to perform good in English. Then I asked her, do you want me to change your teacher? She said, if you could. So that helped me so much, because she was not able to tell me that she was finding that she is lacking. She is not good. And that's why she's not able to perform. But later on, I got to know it was the teacher. But then because she said if you could, then I understood she needed help. Yes. So then I changed the teacher. Now she's very happy. She's, teacher is giving good reports about her, and she's able to write. So, these two ways I can see where she made a decision, and I was able to listen and, help her out.
Yes.
So.
Now, my son messed with the decision. That's why I asked. In high school, he had to choose between computer programming and commerce or anything else. and we left the decision to him. Now he's struggling. So that is why I was asking.
And that's okay, you know, because there are times when we parents choose for them, and they struggle as well, right? So that's where God needs to come in. That's where we need to ask God to help. Don't hold him. How is he supposed to know? As parents, do we know the difference between computer programming and I don't know what else she just said, but you know, we probably have an idea of it, but then, you know, they don't know. They see what is best at that point and they choose. So we don't blame them for their choice. We say, okay, this is what we have now. Now what do we do about it? You know, and with academics, especially parents, we really request you, it's not the end of the world. I know we may have struggled, some of us may have struggled to be where we are today, to make ends meet, to, so you know, provide for our children, but you know, above all there's God. And as we say, if you can give them Jesus, and if they can be stable in their emotions, that is just so much more important. Than even if they lose a year, we say it's fine. It's okay, it's not the end of the world, right? But I'm sure not all of us are in agreement with that, but I'm just saying it, you know, because academics is a big issue in many homes, and it's very heartbreaking to see how the children you know, are perceive these things, and how the parents you know, take pressure from the world and bring it into the home and into the lives of the children. So I just thought I should mention that as well. Okay, so we are totally over time. We wanted to honor and keep time, so we'll keep talking. We will, next week we have a lot more time to share and chat. Like we said, over the week, if you have any questions, I know a couple of you reached out to us, and we are doing one-on-ones with you and with your teen. But if anybody else, you know, wants that, please reach out to us. We will try and have a schedule out this week for you to choose from. But apart from that, if you still want to connect directly with Manoj or me, please feel free to do that. You know, we are available, and yeah, and that's about it for today. I know it's a lot, like Manoj said, we're trying to squeeze it into 3 weeks so that we can make the most out of it. Let's just close in prayer, and yeah, we'll call it a day. Yeah.
Father, we thank you for this time, and Lord, we want to commit every parent and every child, every home, and we just want to thank you for grace that you've given to each of us, and teach us to rely on your grace. Yes, God. Not in human strength and wisdom, for we don't have it, Lord. I want to thank you for grace that you're going to pour out. Yes. I want to thank you for wisdom and revelation that you're going to give to the parents and to the teens. And we just want to speak, Lord, harmony in every home.
Amen.
We want to speak the love of Jesus in every home. We want to speak the light of Jesus in every home. And we want to just declare over every home that your word will come to pass. That you will begin to turn the heart of the parents to their children, and you will turn the heart of the children to their parents. So I want to thank you that you're going to teach each one of us to use our influence wisely, to be good stewards of the grace that you offer to each of us. And so, God, we want to just acknowledge that apart from you, we can do nothing.
Yes, God.
And so we want to commit, Lord, every thought, every emotion. We want to commit our teens especially to you. And as parents, we want to commit our lives to you. Yes, I pray for those who are experiencing issues in their own marriages. Father, we just ask for grace in that area. And for just agreement and harmony, Lord, to be brought about in the days to come. We thank you, and until we meet the next time, we want to commit our homes, or commit our lives to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Do that exercise through the week, the one that we missed today. It's there on the group. And yeah, keep in touch. Any questions, any thoughts, you can continue sharing with us. And we will meet next week, same time. Thank you.
Thank you.